There is a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you stop recognizing the person you used to be. It doesn't come with fireworks or grand epiphanies. It doesn't scream, doesn't shake the earth beneath your feet. It arrives like the morning fog, soft and subtle, veiling what once felt so familiar. One day, you wake up and realize that the face staring back at you in the mirror no longer feels like a stranger. Strangely, it feels more you than the one you've worn for years. You blink, wondering when it happened. This subtle shift, this unannounced unraveling. But there is no precise moment, no definitive signpost, only a quiet sense that something has changed. And in that stillness, something inside of you whispers, "You're not the same." The thoughts that once ruled your mind, the anxieties that tangled themselves around your every decision, no longer command your focus. They still appear, perhaps, but they no longer own you. You notice them with the detachment of someone watching passing clouds. That's when it begins, the realization that something deeper has been unfolding beneath the surface of your awareness. This realization is not comforting at first. It can be disturbing, even terrifying, because once you see what's been hidden, you cannot unsee it. Once you understand what has quietly been influencing your choices, your relationships, your reactions, your beliefs, everything starts to make a different kind of sense. A sense that is both illuminating and unsettling. Patterns rise from the shadows, patterns you've lived without recognizing, emotional echoes that have shaped your journey, behaviors repeated, not out of conscious will, but because they were sewn into your inner landscape. You begin to see that the life you've lived was often dictated by versions of yourself that were never truly you. They were survival strategies, coping mechanisms, masks. A version of yourself has been dissolving while you weren't looking. And now, as the illusion begins to crack, a question arises. Are you ready? Ready to see what's been there all along? Ready to lift the veil from the eyes of your soul and stare into a truth that doesn't ask for permission to exist? You are not here by accident. This message did not reach you by coincidence. Something within you, something silent, sacred, powerful, guided you to this moment. You didn't chase it. You were called to it. You were led not by circumstance, but by the subtle compass of your spirit. You arrived here because a part of you is already ready, even if the rest of you is still catching up. This is not the start of something new. It's the continuation of something ancient, your essence remembering itself. True transformation is not theatrical. It doesn't roar or demand attention. It doesn't require a stage. It unfolds in silence. It whispers. It waits. And when it arrives, it feels less like becoming someone new and more like shedding everything you never really were. You don't need to change who you are. You need to remember who you've always been. The world has taught you to become, to chase, to build identities like armor, to perfect a personality that others can accept, admire, applaud. But Jung once said, true spiritual growth does not come from perfecting the personality. It comes from transcending it. That is what you're beginning to do. You are starting to notice the subtle signs, conversations you no longer resonate with, spaces that once felt familiar now feeling foreign. The stories you used to tell, the ones crafted from pain, struggle, or success, no longer feel like they belong to you. You can still tell them, still remember them, but you no longer inhabit them. There is a distance now, not from denial but from wisdom. You don't reject your past, nor do you glorify it. You simply allow it to be what it was, a sacred part of your becoming. There is a calm that emerges in this space. You no longer explain yourself, justify your wounds, or seek validation for what you've been through. You honor it all in silence, because now your story doesn't need an audience. It just needs your presence. Triggers fade. What once pierced your emotional skin now dissolves like mist in the sunlight. Not because the world is kinder, but because you've become kinder with yourself. More discerning, less reactive. You no longer respond from the pain of your past, but from the presence of your soul. You stop punishing yourself for the person you used to be. You understand deeply that every version of you was doing the best it could with the awareness it had, And in that awareness, your old self does not disappear. It simply steps aside. It stops being the driver and becomes a passenger, a witness, a chapter. What takes its place is something quieter, more stable, a presence that is grounded not in performance or perfection, but in being. And this new presence doesn't demand applause. It doesn't ask to be seen. It doesn't crave recognition. It is steady, whole, at ease with itself, because it knows that peace doesn't come from proving anything. It comes from no longer needing to. As you embody this shift, your emotions stop steering the ship. Not because you suppress them, but because you understand them. You can feel deeply without being consumed. You can witness your anger, your sadness, your fear, not as enemies to conquer, but as messengers to understand. The internal dialogue changes. Old mantras like "I must be enough" or "I can't change" begin to fade. Not because you fought them, but because they stopped making sense. The story that required those lines is no longer being written. You stop identifying with the pain. Stop clinging to the labels that once helped you survive. You no longer define yourself by what you've been through. You define yourself by the essence that remained despite what you've been through. From this space, something new is born, not a new identity, but a new frequency, one that doesn't apologize for existing, one that doesn't shrink to fit into places that never honored your truth. You start to let go, not with resistance, not with bitterness, but with grace. There is no drama, no forced endings, only a quiet release of what no longer resonates. You don't walk away with anger. You simply no longer hold on. And that gentleness, that is the true mark of transformation. With your old self no longer steering the course, something extraordinary begins to take shape. Not externally at first, but in the space between your choices. It's subtle. Not the kind of change that others might immediately notice, but the kind that you feel in every breath, every pause, every unforced decision. You no longer seek to be seen in order to feel real. You're not waiting for anyone's permission to be at peace. Your inner compass now leads, and that compass doesn't speak in commands or demands. It speaks in resonance. If it doesn't feel true, you no longer move toward it. You stop chasing, not because you've grown tired, but because you finally understand what's meant for you doesn't require pursuit. It responds to your vibration, and your vibration is different now. There is a calmness in your presence, a kind of quiet certainty that doesn't announce itself. It simply is. It doesn't beg. It doesn't shout. It rests, rooted deeply in authenticity. You are no longer reacting to life from your wounds. You are choosing from your wisdom. That shift alone changes everything. The places that once drained you, they no longer hold power. You don't linger in conversations that don't nourish. You don't stay in dynamics that pull you back into roles you've outgrown. You feel the subtle tug of misalignment quickly now, and you honor it, not with resistance, not with judgment, but with clarity. You walk away, not because you're angry, but because peace has become your new non-negotiable. And the more you choose peace, the more you realize how much of your past was spent compromising it, trying to maintain relationships that depended on your silence, trying to fit into stories that never felt like your own, trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. But now you let go, not because you're bitter, but because your soul finally knows that anything that costs your peace is too expensive. And in the letting go, you return to something more profound, your presence. It becomes your language of love now. No longer do you need grand gestures to prove your depth. No longer do you need to explain your silence. Your energy speaks for you. It radiates from a place of balance, not lack. It invites connection, but it doesn't grasp. It honors truth, but it doesn't demand it. This is what emotional independence looks like. Not a detachment from others, but a reunion with yourself. You stop needing others to validate your pain, your growth, your worth. You no longer feel unseen when someone doesn't stay. You no longer feel erased when someone doesn't understand. Their departure is no longer your destruction, because you've stopped locating your value in someone else's presence. And that shift, that energetic release, is the birthplace of a new kind of love. A love that isn't conditional. A love that doesn't perform. A love that doesn't sacrifice authenticity in the name of connection. This love is quiet, deep, still. It doesn't rush in. It emerges, slowly, naturally. You begin to connect with others from wholeness, not from holes. You no longer seek salvation in intimacy. You don't need to be rescued from your loneliness. You've made peace with your own company. You've become your own safe place, your own sacred witness. That alone reshapes the fabric of your relationships. You're not trying to be impressive anymore. You're not auditioning for love. You're not negotiating your needs or softening your truth to maintain connection. Now, the only connections you accept are the ones that feel like truth, not intensity, not distraction, not temporary relief, but truth. And truth, as you now know, is often quiet. You no longer invest energy in relationships that exist out of habit, obligation, or shared history alone. If it doesn't evolve with you, it dissolves around you. And yes, sometimes that loss stings, but even the sting feels clean. Because clarity hurts less than illusion. You're no longer afraid to outgrow people, spaces, and versions of yourself. You no longer confuse departure with failure. You've stopped trying to explain your becoming to those who were only meant to accompany you for a chapter, not the whole book. You've stopped romanticizing suffering as proof of love. You no longer stay in dynamics that ask you to abandon yourself just to be chosen. The love you seek now is spacious, real, non-performative. It doesn't need to be loud to be alive. It doesn't ask you to shrink, apologize, or wait. You're finally free from needing love that hurts to feel real. This kind of transformation doesn't make you colder. It makes you clearer. It doesn't shut you off. It tunes you in to resonance, to alignment, to the subtle but powerful guidance of your soul. And with that clarity, boundaries emerge, not as weapons but as invitations. Not to push others away, but to protect what you've built within. These boundaries are not about control. They're about alignment. They organize your energy, your time, your emotional space. You don't argue with reality anymore. You don't cling to what's fading. You allow the unfolding. You trust it, because now your soul is your anchor. You no longer chase timelines created from fear. You don't rush to meet expectations that were never yours to begin with. You've stepped into a quieter rhythm, one that aligns not with the world's urgency, but with your spirit's wisdom. In that rhythm, the ordinary becomes sacred. A slow morning, a breath of calm, a conversation where no one tries to win. These are your miracles now. You begin to experience time differently, not as a pressure to become, but as a vessel to remember. You're not running toward a version of yourself that's somewhere in the future. You're returning to the one that's always been within you. That return is your homecoming. You no longer need to fill every silence. You no longer resist every pause. You no longer interpret uncertainty as danger. You've learned that not knowing isn't a threat. It's a doorway, and through that doorway, something deeper emerges. Trust. You trust yourself. Not as a concept, but as a living, breathing experience. You trust your no. You trust your yes. You trust your pauses. You trust your process. You trust that everything you've walked through wasn't to break you, but to awaken you. You stop looking for meaning in the chaos. You become the meaning by how you choose to move through it. With grace, with awareness, with presence. You stop trying to prove your transformation. You start living it. In the small choices, the subtle moments, the inner quiet that no one else sees but that changes everything. Because your life now reflects your alignment, and alignment is the truest form of freedom. There comes a moment, not dramatic, not thunderous, when you realize the deepest transformation was never about becoming someone else. It was about finally allowing yourself to be, fully, quietly, authentically, without apology, without armor, without performance. You stop living from reaction and begin to respond from presence. It's not that challenges disappear. Life still moves with its rhythm, still presents moments of chaos, discomfort, uncertainty, but your relationship to them changes. You no longer face them from your wounded self. You face them from your aligned self. And that shift is everything. Now even your hardest moments don't unground you like before. You've built something inside that doesn't shake easily. It's not a fortress, it's a root. And because you're rooted in truth, you can bend with life without breaking. You no longer seek constant reassurance. You don't need life to deliver proof that you're on the right path. Your confirmation isn't in outcomes anymore. It's in your inner resonance. When your soul says yes, you trust that more than any external sign. That trust becomes your guidance system. It's not loud. It doesn't beg for attention. It's a quiet alignment, a soft clarity that leads you forward even when the path is still forming beneath your feet. You no longer need certainty. You simply need alignment. You've stopped seeing life through the eyes of lack. You no longer believe you are incomplete, broken, or missing something. You no longer chase healing from the idea that you are wrong. You understand now. Healing was never about becoming better. It was about becoming whole. You see your past differently now. What once looked like chaos, betrayal, failure, now appears as sacred design. The pain you thought would destroy you became the threshold that delivered you home. And now, you speak about your story not with shame or pride, but with reverence. Your past is not erased. It's not forgotten. It's simply no longer your definition. It's your foundation, a necessary path that brought you to this presence. You can finally say, I am not who I used to be, and I'm grateful for that version of me anyway. Because now you understand, that version of you wasn't broken. It was protecting you, loving you in the only way it knew how. And now, with more awareness, you can release it, not with anger but with gratitude. That self was the bridge, but it's no longer the destination. You no longer strive for redemption. You no longer narrate your worth through wounds. You no longer base your identity on who stayed or who left. Because your center no longer resides outside of you. Your home is internal now. Your peace is not negotiated. Your worth is not reactive. Your love is not performative. You're no longer afraid to walk alone because you're no longer abandoned by yourself. And from this new place, something profound begins to emerge. Your relationships evolve again. Not because others have changed, but because you have. You no longer attract connections rooted in need, in validation, in unconscious agreements. You attract resonance, and what is not resonance cannot stay. Not because you closed the door, but because there's no frequency match. The bond fades naturally, without conflict, without resentment. It simply no longer fits. And you've made peace with that. You're not here to convince anyone of your truth. You're not here to hold on to relationships out of guilt, nostalgia, or fear. You're here to live honestly, to love deeply, to stay aligned, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's misunderstood. And when someone sees you now, really sees you, it's not because you molded yourself to be palatable. It's because you showed up without the filter, without the mask. Just you, real, whole, clear. The kind of connection that meets you there is rare. But when it arrives, it's unmistakable. It doesn't consume. It expands. It doesn't ask you to shrink. It invites you to shine. It doesn't rush to define. It simply feels like home. This is the power of choosing yourself. Not an ego, but an essence. Not in rebellion, but in remembrance. You're no longer asking life to shape itself around your wounds. You're shaping your life around your soul. And this shift, so quiet, so personal, changes everything. You notice it in the way you speak, the way you listen, the way you hold space for others without absorbing what isn't yours. You no longer carry emotional weight that doesn't belong to you. You no longer try to heal people who haven't chosen healing for themselves. You no longer shrink so someone else can feel bigger. You no longer confuse love with sacrifice. You no longer call emotional chaos passion. You've learned that true love doesn't demand your self-abandonment. It doesn't ask you to betray your inner knowing. Real love is presence. Real love is clarity. Real love is freedom with roots. And with this wisdom, you begin to give differently. Not from depletion, not from proving, but from overflow. You give what you already are, not what you think you need to become to be enough. And because you give differently, you also receive differently. You no longer accept scraps. You no longer feel unworthy of peace. You no longer confuse being needed with being valued. Everything becomes clearer. Your presence, once hidden behind roles and personas, becomes your offering. Your silence, once filled with anxiety, becomes sacred space. Your stillness, once mistaken for weakness, becomes strength. You've stopped trying to manifest a life from a place of fear. Now you align. You choose. You release. You allow. You don't force the doors open. They open when you're in harmony with yourself. This is what it means to live from soul. Not a life of perfection, but a life of coherence. Not a life free of pain, but a life free of resistance. Not a life of control, but a life of trust. You no longer need to be seen to feel real. You no longer need to be right to feel whole. You no longer need to be chosen to feel loved. You are love. You are presence. You are home. And this entire journey was never about becoming someone else. It was about remembering who you've always been beneath the noise, beneath the roles, beneath the fear. You are not your story. You are not your wounds. You are not your past. You are the one who walked through it all and emerged. And now you walk differently, speak differently, breathe differently. Not because you've achieved something, but because you've returned. Return to your essence, and the world will feel that. Not because you say it, but because you are it.